But as you said, the NFL announced, this is the big story this morning, the salary cap jumps to 255.4 million. If you looked at the history of the cap over the last decade, it generally goes up $8 to $12 million a year. This is a significant jump. We're talking about a $30 million unprecedented increase per club. And it's really due to kind of a correction off of the COVID pandemic and some of the financial tentacles that touched that. So, I mean, just to give a breakdown, it went from 143 in 2015 to 155 in 2016 to 167 in 2017 to 177 in 2018, 188 in 2019. So you see where, and then last year it was 224.8. This year it's 255.4. And that doesn't, so the 49ers right now who were over the cap by like 4 million, are now under the cap by 834,000. And that's before the carryover. And I think they're going to carry over $20 million off their 2023 cap. So they're going to have some room to operate. Who do you like in free agency? I made a list the other day for a video that I did of guys that I really like. You already mentioned Trent Brown. Is there anybody else in free agency, Chase, that you're like, that would be a great Niner? Because one of the names that's being bandied about here quite often is Azeez Al-Shaair.
Yeah.
And I think that makes a lot of sense if Al-Shaair is willing to come back, just simply because he knows the defense, he knows the culture. He was on the sideline for Niners Packers. And to me, that would be a great addition, especially because there wouldn't be any bad vibes as Greenlaw's trying to work his way back. I don't know how that's going to go down. But what do you think? Is there a free agent out there that you say, you know what, outside of Trent Brown, that would be a great fit?
Yeah, I like Robert Hunt at right guard and familiarity with Mike McDaniel's system. So that allows him to translate the Kyle Shanahan system pretty seamlessly. Very good in the run game, solid in pass protection. You sign him at right guard. You sign Trent Brown at right tackle. You make over your offensive line just like that. And what that allows you to do, I don't think that those players are going to get stupid money, but you can then draft some offensive linemen and start to groom them a little bit. And there's some really good prospects in this class that I talked about, which a video is going to come out on that coming up on the 49ers report. This is a great year for the Niners to need offensive linemen because this draft class is so deep, both with offensive linemen on the interior as well as tackles. And you're not going to be rushed into maybe having to play them right from the jump. Now, if you want to address free agency elsewhere outside of offensive line, then maybe you draft some of these players that are a little bit more affordable, and then you start to groom them. But if you don't want to play them right away and you do address it in free agency, maybe you get your future Trent Williams replacement coming down the pipeline a little bit. Maybe you get somebody who plays guard right now, but they can play and slide out to right tackle at some point in the future. So the wheels are turning a little bit, I imagine, for the Niners now, with them being under the cap, as you mentioned, with the salary cap increasing by 13.5%, with them just having some more financial wiggle room. So Robert Hunt, I like Trent Brown at right tackle. Azeez Al-Shaair, I think, would be a great addition. This is a Niners organization that really values linebacker. The backbone of their defense, you can make the argument, is kind of based on the linebacker position. And this has been the case for a really, really long time. Patrick Willis, Navarro Bowman, Fred Warner, Dre Greenlaw. Azeez Al-Shaair a couple of years ago, when Dre Greenlaw was hurt, he had more than 100 tackles. And this year for Tennessee, Rand Carthon knew that this guy was a dog, that he was a good player. And that's why you brought him in. His first opportunity to be a full-time starter, fifth in the NFL in tackles, fifth in TFLs, really good at rushing the quarterback, really good at shooting the gaps in the run game. And now I like D Winters. I like Jalen Graham. I think what Johnny Holland, linebackers coach, has been able to do with all of the linebackers on this team who have been here for a while, or the new guys who really flashed in the preseason for me as late round picks, I think they can be good players. But are they ready to step in for Dre Greenlaw, who I just can't imagine is going to be able to return this year. And if he does, it's at the end of the year. So Azeez Al-Shaair knows the system. He was with the linebacking room before, I think, the Packers playoff game, dancing with them on the field. He used to room with Dre Greenlaw. He's a young, still an ascending player who I think would be a great scheme fit. You plug him in next to Fred Warner, you're not missing a beat at linebacker. And now that you have more dollars, do you go after a player like Brian Burns if he doesn't get franchise
Ooh,
tagged by the
yeah.
Carolina Panthers? He would be a great edge rusher opposite of Nick Bosa, who has consistent production, unlike Chase Young, consistent effort, unlike Chase Young, and probably is going to be a little bit more expensive, but is a better player. Do you go after a guy like Bryce Huff of the New York Jets, who
Yes.
pass rush win rate was really, really good this past year, and you connect the dots, Robert Saleh defensive system. He knows this scheme that the Niners are trying to pivot back toward, regardless of who the defensive coordinator is, because they're going to try to get back to their roots. So I look at those players. Cam Curl is an affordable safety, but I really like the future safety tandem of Talanoa Hufanga and Jair Brown. But if you don't want to extend a Talanoa Hufanga, do you go to the cheaper route with a guy like Cam Curl for Washington, who's still 25 years old, cerebral player, very, very physical? So the salary cap increasing opens up a lot of opportunities, and the Niners are under the cap right now. They can free up about $50 million if they restructure Trent Williams' contract, do the same for Debo and Eric Armstead, if they extend Fred Warner, and that's without maybe lowering the $14.1 million in guaranteed money for Brandon Ayuk if they give him an extension. And of course, as part of this, before I throw it back to you, we got to talk about Ayuk being more realistic now, because now that the cap goes up and is going to continue to increase because business is going to continue to be booming across the National Football League, does that increase the likelihood that Ayuk can start to make more money than Debo Samuel, which he deserves, and he can get the contract that he's certainly earned?
Those are so many good names there. I'm going to throw a few more your way. I love Kenny Moore, the
Okay.
Indianapolis slot corner. To me, I mean, they've got Mooney and they've got Lenore, and man, they could use one more corner. I love Kenny Moore. Azeez, we already mentioned. I could see Noah Fant if they wanted to move off of Juice.
Okay.
Maybe Noah Fant as a fullback, backup tight end. Sort of, to me, I think he could fit nice. A couple guys that I'm waiting to see if they get franchised: Jonathan Greenard from Houston, Kyle Duggar from New England. I'm a big fan of Sadiq Charles, who's the former LSU player in Washington. I think he might be an underrated offensive guard. Damian Lewis from Seattle, and one guy that to me would be a phenomenal ad is Willie Gay. Now, Willie Gay is just, I thought, really did a nice job defending Purdy in the Super Bowl. He's just so damn fast on that second level that he's got impact speed. But I love the ones you threw out. I think Bryce Huff might be the most underrated outside rusher in the game today. And, Trent Brown, Robert Hunt, Brian Burns. The one thing that when I looked into I did a deep dive on the draft, is I like there's a few edge rushers I like on day 2 and day 3. I don't love a lot of the edge pieces outside of the top 10.
Me either.
Once you get beyond Liatu from UCLA and Dallas Turner from Alabama, it really falls off. I don't see the Niners even having an option at defensive end with that first, that late first round pick. But let's talk about Duggar for a second. I agree with you that it's, Hufanga and Brown down the road. In fact, I don't think I would. The Niners have 20 free agents, Chase. I think I would let 15 of them go. And one of the 15 I would let go would be Tayshaun Gibson, who I just thought was a step slow against Kelsey in the Super Bowl in that second half. And I just think you could do better than Tayshaun Gibson. But that leads us to the D. And I didn't even mention Joey Bosa. What do you think of Joey Bosa? A lot of people are asking about Joey Bosa. Do you think Joey Bosa would take less money to come here if he gets cut?
I agree with you on Gibson. He's been a great story. Like when the Niners signed him going into 2022, signed him to the practice squad because of Jimmy Ward being injured. And then they signed him to the active roster because Ward was going to miss some time. Then Gibson played so well that they had to move Jimmy Ward to the slot because Gibson was really thriving alongside Talanoa Hufanga, who Gibson kind of credited with bringing this youthful nature back to him and revitalizing his career to a certain degree. I thought that Gibson was good for much of the year. And then the playoffs started to fall off a little bit. He got penalized a lot against Green Bay early. And you're so right. Travis Kelce was just in a different world as compared to Gibson. Look, Father Time is undefeated. He's just a little bit older. And he was a very serviceable and very quality safety for this team. I love Kyle Duggar because he's kind of that safety linebacker hybrid. I know you've been on the Bill Belichick movement to hire him as the next defensive coordinator. I would make my first call. I would have made my first call to Bill Belichick to be the next Niners DC because I'm trying to go all in to win a Super Bowl, knowing that this window is closing. But Bill Belichick, everybody's like, he's washed, he's cooked, he's old. That defense was a top 10 unit
Yeah.
last year. And if he loves Kyle Duggar, I love Kyle Duggar because Bill Belichick knows DBs and Duggar can play deep safety. He can mix it up around the line. He can play in the slot, little hybrid linebacker. I think that he'd be a really solid player. Joey Bosa is a fascinating conversation because
He's
when
been
he's
hurt.
been on the field, he's been really productive. But over the last 2 years, he played 5 games in 2022 with 4 starts. And then this year, he played 9 games with 5 starts. So that's a total of 14 games the last 2 years. And what really worries me, very good production throughout his career. Rookie year, 10 and a half sacks. Year two, 12 and a half. And then the injuries start to pile up. 7 games in year three, 16 in year four, 12 after that, 16, and then 5 and 9 the last 2 years. For a big guy who relies on his strength, power, mobility, athleticism, quick twitch, him and Nick are just pass rush technicians. A lot of foot injuries. And big guys who have foot injuries, I don't care what sport, basketball,
Yep.
football, they're just problematic. So the Chargers would save $14 million in cutting him. And they could cut him. They could cut Keenan Allen, Mike Williams to free up a bunch of capital for Jim Harbaugh in his first year. I think those are smart moves for LA. You have quarterback. You have some other really good players on that team. You can survive without them. You cut Khalil Mack. That saves you a lot of money as well. If there's a Chargers edge, who I'm going to go after, it's a Khalil Mack. I don't think it's a Joey Bosa. The conversation is fun. Nick, Joey, reuniting his brothers. But he's just been injured way too much. And I know Nick had said we'd take over the NFL. Yeah, you might if he's healthy.
For a
but
month.
He's just not healthy enough.
Yeah. Samuel here says, Larry Chase, should we try to sign Snead? The Niners' goal the last couple of years is sign one great free agent. L'Jarius Sneed would be a dramatic signing. It would take him away from Kansas City. It would be in that same Mooney Ward, Javon Hargrave kind of mindset. Not just, a great player, but a great player that you're taking away from, like Hargrave came from the Eagles. What do you think? Could you see the Niners making a big play for Snead?
Yeah, I think that he'd be a really good corner opposite of Charvarius Ward. And Ward is an interesting conversation. Final year of his deal, he's been a great value play for $14 million per on the average annual value. That was a classic Niners signing where they signed him from Kansas City. They paid him decent coin, projecting that he would be a cornerback one. He's been a cornerback one for this team, yet they haven't paid him cornerback one money. 14 million per for a lockdown corner on the outside is great value. Second team all pro this year. Yes. So I liked what he did against Debo and Ayuk. His ability to kind of press at the line was impressive against those two. And I completely disagree with Bucky Brooks in saying that Ayuk is a bad route runner. Ayuk's a great route runner. His footwork and route running and him being a technician in that area is phenomenal. I do agree with Bucky Brooks and what he said about Debo because Debo is not a natural route runner. And CJ Gardner-Johnson was kind of right about that and saying you can't run routes because Debo's a great playmaker. One of one. You don't see a lot of weapons like that across the NFL, but he did struggle in that press man. And Snead even gave Tyreek Hill a lot of trouble against the Miami Dolphins in the wild card round. And he was jamming him at the line and kind of faked him out, causing Tyreek Hill to false start. Just a smart player. And he's very similar to Ward, not just because of the Chiefs connection. A player who started off as a nickel corner, And Ward was undrafted. The Chiefs actually traded for him with the Dallas Cowboys. But what I mean by this, both under the radar players who ended up developing really well, probably outpriced themselves with Kansas City, but then went somewhere else with the stock up, them rounding into form, and ended up being really good players. Ward became that. I think Snead is becoming that right now. He was a borderline all-pro this past year, and I think that would be a good play for San Francisco.
Okay, Ayuk, what do you think? Is this cap increase? Does it change their thinking? I mean, and I'm hearing teams like the Raiders and the Giants are going to come correct with some serious offers for Ayuk. I mean, this is a weird deal because like Devontae Adams, Tyreek Hill, AJ Brown, they were all really good receivers, and they all asked to get traded, and they all got their wish and got traded. Is Ayuk? Some of the dialogue around Ayuk's really interesting. And then a guy called me last night, a buddy of mine who always is has wild ideas, but he's a big Niner fan, and he's like, Minnesota can't get it together with Justin Jefferson. Why don't the Niners trade Ayuk to Minnesota in a deal for Jefferson? And I was like, wow, that would be incredible to have Justin Jefferson. But Jefferson's trying to reset the market over Tyreek Hill's money. The market's not set. Ayuk's going to get paid a ton. He only had 3 catches in each of the 3 playoff games. Where are you with Ayuk? Would you pay him? Would you trade him? What do you want in return if you do trade him?
I would pay him, and I think he's everything that the Niners want in a wide receiver. And you think about the whole process of his career up to this point, right? He was a JUCO guy before he went to Arizona State.
Yeah.
So the Niners really had to do their due diligence in scouting him and looking into him. And they had him higher on their draft board than a lot of other people in the 2020 draft. So they used the 25th overall pick on a former JUCO product when at the time that pick was getting ripped by a lot of people. Do we remember how pumped up Kyle Shanahan was when the Niners drafted Ayuk? He was elated from a guy that doesn't show a lot of emotion, right? So he's pumped up. And the Niners have invested a lot of time and effort into developing him. And I thought it was really impressive how he gets drafted 25th overall, COVID offseason, and there's no preseason games. There's limited training camp practices. Yet Ayuk comes out in 12 games. And I know that was the injury plague season for San Francisco coming off of Super Bowl 54, but he led the Niners in receiving as a rookie. And then in year 2, after some growing pains, partially because of him, partially because Shanahan is a little bit stubborn, as we know, former wide receiver, coach's son, who always tries to nitpick a little bit. That's part of the reason why he's an elite coach in this league. Remember when Ayuk's in the doghouse to start 2021? And then he comes out of the doghouse because he's not putting forward a lot of effort in blocking, in the run game. He starts to do that. He ends 2021 on a tear. And then last year, for the first time, surpasses 1,000 receiving yards. This year, he ends up being a second-team All-Pro, and he was a top 10 wide receiver in the NFL. So the Niners draft him, hoping that at some point he's going to be a wide receiver 1, when they already had Deebo Samuel coming off that rookie year in which he was an impact player as a rookie for a Super Bowl team. And Ayuk has ended up being a wide receiver 1. So you draft him 25th, you invest all this time in him. Now he wants to get paid and you're just not going to pay him. I think the Niners are going to do everything in their power to pay him for the reasons that I mentioned. But look at the Niners' previous history. George Kittle, contract extension. Fred Warner, contract extension. Deebo Samuel, contract extension. They did the same with Nick Bosa last year. So that's consecutive years in which the Niners have prioritized paying their homegrown players. And Ayuk really embodies what Shanahan is all about and what this Niners team is all about. Player development, growth, highly skilled, but also tough, rugged, physical, embracing blocking in the run game. He was the number 1, and this is no surprise, blocking wide receiver in the NFL. Ended up being probably a better deep threat than the Niners ever envisioned. And you have a young quarterback here in Brock Purdy, who finally, under Kyle Shanahan, we see what this offense can look like with the vertical threat. Ayuk has been that, and he's a great weapon for Purdy. So the only reason that I think Ayuk leaves is if he wants wide receiver one money that the Niners aren't willing to pay him, or he wants out because he wants wide receiver one targets, knowing that the Niners can't give him wide receiver one targets in an offense that is loaded with a bunch of skill players. But then I think back to locker room cleanout day. Did you see how emotional Brandon Ayuk was? He could not believe that the Niners lost that game, but you could see how much he loved this team and his teammates. He was crying. So does Ayuk want to go to the Las Vegas Raiders, where he has a connection with Antonio Pierce, going back to Arizona State when Herm Edwards was there and Pierce was an assistant? Who's the quarterback going to be for the Raiders? So if you want wide receiver one targets and to be paid like the top wide receiver, how has that worked out for Davante Adams? He's been frustrated ever since he left Green Bay. So this gives you an opportunity with Kyle Shanahan, with Brock Purdy, who you have kinship with, and an offense that always produces for a team that is always going to be a playoff contender and Super Bowl contender. It sounds like the perfect situation for Ayuk. I think everything that we're kind of hearing right now, his buddy saying BA to Vegas, his girlfriend and the mother to his son saying this could be our last year, it's all leverage.
Yeah.
Remember when George Kittle's agent was saying it's a Valentine's Day massacre? They signed him. Debo, I want out. They brought him back. Nick Bosa could leave. He's back as well. I think Ayuk will be back.
I mean, even yourself, it's like, I heard that you took down all of your chat sports stuff on your social media because you want more money. And, this is just what the stars do, right? They wash their social media of their employer. No, I'm just joking, of course. But give me 3 names on the way out the door. 3 names